Let's get into the AI news, and it's been a fortnight since our last catch up, and I feel like OpenAI have had an interesting couple of months. You know, from going out with $1 trillion of compute commitments, with only probably $50 billion in the bank or something, or 13 billion of revenue and $1 trillion of commitments, which that almost caused a bubble crash, popping the bubble about a month ago. And then now Sam's publicly or privately called the code red in the business, which we might have spoken about 2 weeks ago. But since in the last month, what I think is more interesting is they've hired 40 Apple hardware engineers. And he is saying that the battlefield is really going to be in hardware. And that's where the battle's going to be. So obviously he had the announcement with Johnny Ive, like, probably a year ago. What are your thoughts on what's happening here? What's if we dig a little bit deeper, and what's he really saying, and what are they really doing with these hires?
Look, I think getting Johnny Ive was definitely not about, it wasn't like Johnny Ive had a product, right? He's an ideas guy. He's very famous. He's in with the Apple network. So it probably was a long-term plan to compete with Apple. Like, I don't think this idea is new for Sam or OpenAI, and that was a very strategic early hire to get an inspirational person that could lead a new generation of hardware. I think this probably is very aligned to the comment that Elon made around where the future of devices is going, that with AI capabilities, you may not have an operating system in its traditional sense. You may just have these nodes on a network that have AI models running, and then they just generate what you need on the fly. And that sounds like very vague, but essentially what it's saying, like, rather than pre-writing all the code for this operating system and these different apps, you've just got these models that know how to communicate with each other and build the intelligence on the fly. And potentially they're looking in that space, like, and saying, well, if we're going to build new devices, then what does this look like? But at the same time, in this article that you're talking about, it does say, like, competition with Google and Apple, and that Apple could be the one to go and do this. And if they can keep the phones around, if you just augment the operating system to run AI models locally, then maybe that stops the need to have all of these frontier model companies that are taking a lot of money by having subscriptions. Like, you can imagine if Apple did build AI into the core of their operating system, would you need a ChatGPT anymore? Or does the operating system do that for you? There's probably like kind of two takes on it that I can think of, but it's not something that I have a super strong opinion on.
Did you see Meta acquired Limitless, my guys?
I did. What was your thoughts when you received that email?
My thoughts were that I hadn't seen anything on X, so I felt privileged that I was getting some inside goss. What was actually funnier, so for people that don't know, Limitless Pendant was sort of like the first AI wearable, distributed globally. They came about 6 months late after I ordered it. The charge on it was pretty terrible, and the models behind it were okay. Basically, sitting on your shirt, listening to everything you do all day, and then summarizing your day and getting some takeaways. What was really interesting is that an hour earlier, I received an email saying a complete change of the privacy policy, saying,
Wow.
basically you're going to lose access today unless you click on this link updating your privacy policy, right? And then secondly, also the software layer is now not available in these like 15 countries, China, UK, Brazil. I'm like, wow, God, this is aggressive. This is such an aggressive email to send customers. Then an hour later, I'd like to announce that we've been acquired by Meta.
1 hour. You'd think they would have left it a week. Like, Zuck, at least give it a week to settle.
So you can just tell that I think people have been mentioning lately as well that, like, there's a lot of movement in Meta. Obviously, your man's left, Jan. Zuck sounds like he's scrambling at the moment. And this acquisition, obviously, it must be moving at outrageous pace for this sort of quick pivoting and moving customers around and sending out these weird emails. And like everyone in Britain now can't use their device. So I just feel like it's leaning into a bit of like, one, I think it's topical because of this hardware layer, super important. Meta's got Oakley, they got the Ray-Bans, and then now they're going to have the wearable. So they think that it's the same thought that Sam's going through. But two, it just sort of to me, and Meta are no longer thinking about going open source, so they're pivoting away from their whole AI strategy. So it just sounds like Zuck might be having a private code red as well. What we've heard a lot about this week is AI data centers in space. And a really smart guy, Gavin Baker, had an interesting podcast this week talking about it, and probably going a little bit deeper on just some of the first principles thinking behind it. I think it's been talked about for probably the last 2 months. Great for SpaceX and Blue Origin. But what they're basically saying is, what do data centers need? They need energy, and the sun's 7 times more powerful in orbit than it is on the ground at Earth. On Earth, you need land. Every environmental and NIMBY sort of politician is saying we don't want data centers in our town. And then the other thing they need cooling to cool them down, and it's freezing in space. So theory being that limitless land or space, energy from the sun, cooling from the temperature, that this is the natural place to house data centers. Super interesting space, pardon the pun, but from my point of view, I just can't believe that then the bottleneck's going to be rockets. And who's there? Who's sitting there with the rockets? It's unbelievable.
Yeah, why I like this post was he went into the fundamentals of why it makes sense. And I think often you don't get that from, VC investors. And Gavin Baker, like you said, very smart guy, runs a big crossover fund. He's not just a typical VC. He does his research. That's what his whole business is built on. But I do love it when investors get really technical and they understand the tech. What's his name? The other guy from the B2S, the BG Squared pod, Brad Gerstner. Not B2S. Yep. B2S is on its way up to be bigger than that pod. But from BG Squared, he runs Altimeter. He does the same thing. He's super, super technical on whether it's AI chips that they're investing in, whether it's B2B SaaS, whether it's hardware. And the way they broke this podcast down is that this actually just makes sense. Yeah, if you can get enough rockets to get these up into space, let's not put it on our Earth that we've got here. Let's have them orbiting around. We have connection to them. The only bandwidth, they've got the bandwidth problem still. You're not right next to it, but that's what we've got with satellites anyway. So it makes heaps of sense. You've got the cooling solved. You're in front of the sun for the energy. So I really liked that part of this, and probably am not well equipped to talk about in a super detailed way. But when you hear a smart person going into the fundamentals of a business like this, it's really cool to see. The founder of Kalshi is now the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world.
Really? I've never heard of it. So it's just similar thing?
It's a competitor. I don't know it in detail. It's not really my thing, these kind of betting markets. But Kalshi. I think it's a direct competitor to Polymarket. And young female founder that is now a billionaire.
Wow. It's funny because Polymarket's not available in Australia. I don't know if it's available anywhere outside of the US. But I'm wondering, like in Australia, we've got so many. It's like Australia's the capital in the world of gambling, right? I'm wondering why there's not an Australian version that's just more about business and, topical than sport. Like it seems so obvious to me.
It does. And it's the best way to get real on the ground information, getting people to put their own opinions backed by monetary value. Like that's like the definition of how to get a market equilibrium.
It's a company called Boom Supersonic who is looking to do supersonic flight, London to New York in an hour or two or something like that. And they've been working for a few years now on solving this, because flight's been the same now post Concorde for 30 years, and they're working on this supersonic flight. But what's really interesting is they've realized that there's this data center energy issue going on, as the number one bottleneck for AI and probably intelligence. And they've realized that their turbines, that their technology they're creating for supersonic flight can be used to generate electricity as a natural gas turbine. And they just announced 300 mil of funding through Altimeter, the guys from BG Squared. They got Y Combinator in, I think Chamath's in. Like, what a remarkable thing to do as a business, to when you're working on something. For software, it might be your logic or UI or whatever, and in this, it's hardware, it's turbines, and then find another amazing demand for your product.
Yeah. I love this so much because I've heard of these types of stories before on a much smaller scale than this. But I even have friends who run startups that have done things similar to this. I have a friend, Nathan, who ran a company called Upbound, which was the sales automation tool, and they were not getting the traction they needed. He was on his last legs when it comes to funding. He went out and did consulting with his team for a bunch of companies to keep the lights on. Through that consulting, they learnt of the bigger problem they needed to be solving for, and they went and built that, and now they're doing really well. And so there's lots of these stories, even the Airbnb story. Did you hear how they initially funded their ideas outside of the YC funding?
No.
With the cereal boxes. So it was around the election time, Obama versus, I can't remember who it was. And they decided to sell Obama and the other candidates cereal boxes. And you just bought cereal with, Obama's face on it as the blue box, and they had the red box, and they sold out like crazy just because at a massive premium. That's how they funded a bunch of the initial Airbnb story. And this is like that on steroids. It's like they've got this massive, this awesome technology, and then they go, well, if we're not getting the funding we need to build the jets that we want, how could we use this tech? Find demand for it, go use that, and then fund your initial business idea. Like, there's just something about that I love so much.
Interesting though, I mean, going back to the future, is David Sachs posted this week basically saying that it looks like wages are going up 25 to 30% in construction workers. So electricians, plumbers, concrete, plasterers. I don't know how many people thought that AI was going to raise construction wages. I don't know how many people had that on their bingo card, but that's pretty exciting and pretty narrative breaking, isn't it? Really?
It is. The thing I was actually going to ask you on this, though, what this reminds me of is the problem that we've had in Melbourne, or at least that some clients tell me, and I'd love to hear it from you. But we always hear about the issues of these big infrastructure projects that are overspending and overpaying for labor and sucking up all the labor. Is this not what is happening now in data centers, that because there's all the demand, all the labor's going there? How is the average home builder going to go and find labor, or is that the wrong take?
Look, I think it's really interesting. Australia's not building 1% of the data centers that the US is. So we haven't felt it as much here. But what I don't mind about this is the thing that's pissed off construction companies is the government has augmented the labor market in Australia for the last 5-6 years, or probably for the last 10, with so much government spending. That's then killed the private sector, or it's made the private sector costs. But with data centers, at least it's private companies deploying capital for a commercial outcome, that we as taxpayers aren't paying for. We're actually the benefactors of. So I think, if labor prices go up to build AI, and that AI you then use as a tool to make yourself more efficient, I would probably look at it the other way and say, okay, construction labor is going up. That gives us more reasons to automate more work and invest in robotics and things like that. So I think the market forces just play out, and to be on the right end of it, like we've said, you just have to be finely tuned to what's happening so that you can see this and go, okay, maybe I don't want to lock in my labor costs on, certain projects or something like that. But also maybe I need to be looking at how to get more done with less labor.